Chapter 21. Nahri. Nahri pounded again on the door to her husband's apartment. "Mudadir, I don't care who's in there or what you're drinking. Open up. We need to go." There was no response. Her frustration reached dangerous levels. She knew her husband and early mornings were no companions, but it had taken her weeks to arrange this visit to the Grand Temple, and they were already running late. She banged on the door again. "If I have to drag you out of bed—" The door abruptly opened. Nahri nearly tumbled in, narrowly catching herself. "Banu Nahida." Mudadir leaned heavily against the door frame. "Wife," he clarified, lifting a jade wine cup to his lips. "Always so impatient." Nahri stared at him, completely lost for words. Mudadir was half-dressed, wearing what appeared to be a woman's shawl wrapped around his waist, and the dramatically peaked court cap of a Tukharistani noble. A burst of laughter behind him caught her attention, and Nahri glanced past his shoulder to see two dazzling women lounging in similar states of disarray. One was smoking from a water pipe, while the second, dressed in nothing but Muntadir's court turban, wrapped in a way it was certainly not intended, rearranged game pieces. Nahri inhaled, fighting the sudden desire to burn the room down. "Muntadir," she said, her jaw clenching. "Do you not remember that we're supposed to be visiting the Grand Temple today?" "You know, I did remember, as a matter of fact." Muntadir drained his cup. Nahri threw up her hands. "Then what is this? I can't take you to my people's holiest place while you're drunk and wearing your courtesan's scarf." "I'm not going." Nahri blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not going. I already told you. I think this plan to hire and treat Shafit is madness." But you agreed to come today, and your father told you to." Her voice rose in alarm. "Ah, there you are wrong," Muntadir declared, wagging a finger in her face. "He did not order such a thing specifically. He said you had our support." He shrugged. "So tell your priests that you do." "They're not going to believe me. And if you don't show up, they're going to think there's a reason." She shook her head. "I can't risk another excuse for them to oppose me. They'll take this as an insult." Muntadir snorted. "They'll be relieved. You're the only Deva who wants to see a Katani in your temple." The other women laughed in the background again, one throwing dice, and Nahri flinched. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Do you really hate me so much?" His disinterested expression slipped. I don't hate you, Nahri. But you're going down a path I can't support, with a partner who destroys everything he touches. I will not sit with my future subjects in a place they hold sacred and make promises I don't believe in. You could have told me that last week. Muntadir inclined his head. Last week, Alizade had yet to threaten my cousin with hellfire in front of a mob of angry mixed bloods. Nahri grabbed his wrist. He did what? I did try to warn you. Go ask your sheikh about it. Hell, ask him to go to the temple with you. I'm sure it would be most entertaining. Muntadir removed his arm from her grasp and then shut the door in her face. For a full breath, Nahri stood there stunned. Then she slammed her fists against the door. Muntadir! It stayed closed. As her fury grew, a few cracks appeared in the carved wood, and the hinges began to smoke. No. Nahri stepped back. She'd be damned if she was going to humiliate herself begging her drunken wretch of a husband to keep his word. But damn the bloody princes and their idiotic arguments. She whirled around, charging down the hall. If Alizade al-Khatani's recklessness ruined her plans today, she was going to poison him. The door to Ali's apartment was closed when she arrived, and a soldier rose to his feet as she approached. Out of patience and with the palace's magic whirling in her blood, Nahri had no sooner snapped her fingers than a corner brazier unfurled, tossing its fiery contents to the floor and snaking around the soldier's ankle. It yanked him to the ground, and the door burst open before her. She stepped in and then paused, for a moment not certain she'd entered the correct room. Ali's apartment was in chaos. A half-dozen floor desks were being used by harassed-looking secretaries, and scrolls and record books were everywhere, as were people pushing papers around and arguing in multiple languages. Ali's irate voice drifted to her from across the room. And I told you I've already awarded the contract. I don't care who your boss's uncle is. That's not how I do things. The hospital's plumbing is being installed by a guild without a history of hexing their competition. She made her way toward him, dodging several startled scribes. Ali noticed her approach at once and quickly straightened up. So swiftly, in fact, that he upset an ink bottle across his pale blue dishdasha. Banu Nahida, peace be upon you, he stammered, dabbing at the ink. Aren't you supposed to be at the Grand Temple? I was supposed to be, yes. She pushed away the edge of her chador to poke a finger at his chest. With my husband. That is what my people and priests are expecting. And yet my husband is now in his cups, entertaining company that is definitely not me, and he's saying you're responsible. That you were shouting in the streets about how his cousin was going to burn in hell. She jabbed him again. Do the two of you not have a single grain of sense between you? Ollie's expression instantly grew stormy. I didn't say he was going to burn in hell, he defended. I suggested he repent before that happened. Nahri felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She closed her eyes for a minute, willing herself to be calm. Alizade, I spent weeks fighting with the priests to allow this visit. If he doesn't come, they'll view it as a slight. And if they view it as a slight, if they don't think I have your family's support, then how do you think they're going to react when I announce I want to overturn centuries of tradition to work alongside Shafit? I'm staking my reputation on this hospital. If it fails because you can't keep your mouth shut, hellfire is going to be the least of your problems. She'd swear the air sparked as the threat left her lips, and she didn't miss the speed at which several of the nearest jinn backed away. Ollie swallowed. I'll fix it. I swear. Go to the temple and wait for him. Nahri was not feeling optimistic. At her side, Jamshid shifted. I wish you'd let me go talk to him. She shook her head. This is between me and Muntadir. And you shouldn't be solving his problems for him all the time, Jamshid. He sighed, readjusting his cap. Like Nahri, he was in his temple attire, bloody and ash-stained hospital smocks traded for silk chadors and coats. Did you tell Nasreen the truth about why we were coming here? Nahri shifted on her feet. No, she confessed. Nasreen had stayed behind to oversee the infirmary, a thing for which Nahri was secretly relieved. She didn't need another voice arguing against her. We have not been seeing eye to eye on much lately. She doesn't strike me as the type to enjoy being left in the dark, Jamshid observed mildly. Nahri grimaced. She didn't like the tension that had grown between her and her mentor, but neither did she know how to fix it. Jamshid glanced at the gate. Speaking of unhappy elders, I should probably tell you that my father is... The clattering of hooves cut him off. Nahri glanced up to see a rider in an ebony robe cantering toward them. Relief flared in her chest. It lasted only a moment, because that rider was not her husband. Ollie was at their side in seconds, looking, well, rather damn princely on a magnificent gray stallion. He was dressed in royal colors, the first time she'd ever seen him so, the gold-trimmed black robe smoking around his ankles, the brilliant blue, purple, and gold turban wrapped around his head. He'd shaved his scruffy beard into a semblance of order and was even wearing jewelry, a strand of pearls looping his neck and a heavy silver ring crowned with one of the famed pink diamonds of treachery on his left thumb. Nahri gawked at him. "You're not Muntadir." "I am not," he agreed, sliding from the horse. He must have prepared in a hurry. He smelled of freshly burned auger wood, and there were drops of water still clinging to his neck. "My brother remains indisposed." Jamshid was looking at Ali with open hostility. "Are those his clothes?" "He doesn't seem to need them today." Ali glanced back, peering in the direction from which he'd come. "Where is she?" he asked, seemingly to himself. "She was right behind me." Jamshid stepped between them. "Nahri, you can't bring him into the temple," he warned, switching to Daevastana. "People burn him in effigy in the temple." Nahri didn't get a chance to respond. Another rider had joined them, one even more surprising than Ali. "Peace be upon you," Zainab said in a gallant tone as she dismounted. "A lovely day, isn't it?" Nahri's mouth actually fell open. The Khatani princess looked even more dazzling than her brother, in billowy gold riding pants beneath a brightly striped indigo tunic. She wore her black shayla lightly, under a headdress of glittering sapphires, her face partially obscured by a silver gaziri mask. Jewels winked from each of her fingers. Zainab took her brother's hand, turning a winning smile toward the Devas who'd gathered to gawk. There was no denying the royal siblings made for an extraordinary sight, something Zainab seemed to be relishing. What are you doing here?" Nahri managed to ask. Zainab shrugged. "Ali came running and said you needed Khatanis to help sway your priests. Now you have some. Even better, you have me." Her tone was sugar-sweet. "If you're not aware, the two of you," she motioned between Ali and Nahri, "are rather abrasive." Her gaze slid past Nahri. "Jamshid," she said warmly, "how are you? How is your father?" Some of the anger left Jamshid's face at Zainab's aggressive goodwill. "We are well, Princess. Thank you for asking." He darted a look at Nahri. "Actually, on the matter of my father, he is here." Nahri closed her eyes. This was all beginning to feel like a terrible dream. "Your father is back? Kaveh is here?" Jamshid nodded, swallowing. "He typically goes straight to the temple after a journey, to thank the Creator for ensuring his safety." "What a lovely tradition," Zainab said cheerfully, aiming a sharp look at her brother. At the mention of Kaveh, Ollie's face had twisted like he'd sucked on a lemon. "Isn't that right, Alizade?" Ollie offered something that might have been a nod. "Yes. Lovely." "Shall we go?" Zainab said, stepping between the men. "Jamshid, would you give me a tour? Ali and Nahri likely have many extremely boring things to discuss." "Your sister?" Nahri hissed as soon as Jamshid and Zainab moved out of earshot. Ali looked at her helplessly. "Kaveh?" "That's a surprise to me as well," she said grimly. "He's very orthodox. He will argue against this." "And he won't like seeing me here," Ali warned. We do not have the most amicable history." "You and Kaveh?" she asked sarcastically. "I can't imagine why not." She sighed, glancing at the temple gates. For all her fears, bringing Alizade al-Khatani into the temple was not nearly as bad as saying she intended to work alongside Shafit. "Leave your weapons in my litter." Ali's hand went to the hilt of his Zulfikar like an overprotective mother might clutch a child. "Why?" "We don't allow weapons in the temple." "None," she added, sensing this was a thing to be clear upon with the warrior prince before her. "Fine," he muttered, removing his Zulfikar and Khanjar and placing them delicately inside Nahri's litter. He freed a small knife from a holster around his ankle, and then a spike from his sleeve. He turned back, the sunlight glinting off the copper relic in his ear. "Let's go." Zainab and Jamshid were already halfway down the main path, Zainab's lilting voice carrying back to them. The temple grounds were crowded as usual, with local Daevabadis strolling the manicured grounds and extended families of pilgrims seated on rugs spread under shade trees. People had stopped to look at Zainab, excitedly peeking and pointing in the princess's direction. The sight of Ali provoked a very different reaction. Nahri heard a couple of gasps, catching sight of narrowed eyes and open horror. She ignored it. She straightened her shoulders and tipped her chin up. She would not show weakness today. Ali gazed upon the temple complex with visible appreciation, seeming not to notice the hostility around him. "This is beautiful," he said admiringly as they passed a row of towering cedars. "These trees look like they've been here since Anahid's time." He knelt, running his fingers over one of the brightly colored stone discs that made up the temple's pathways. "And I've never seen anything like these." "They're from the lake," Nahri explained. "Supposedly the Marid brought them up as tribute." "The Marid?" He sounded startled as he straightened up, holding the stone. It was the bright orange of a setting sun, flecked with bits of crimson. I didn't realize. The stone in his hand abruptly brightened, shimmering as if under a pale sea. Nahri knocked it out of his hand. Ollie's eyes were wide. I'm sorry. It's fine. Nahri dared a glance around them. People were watching, of course, but it didn't seem anyone had noticed. She heard Ollie swallow. Do the stones do that often? He asked hopefully. Never, as far as I'm aware. She gave him a sharp look. Then again, considering the source of these stones... He cleared his throat, silencing her. Can we not talk about that here? He had a point. Fine, but don't touch anything else. Nahri paused, recalling just who she was about to bring into the temple. And maybe don't say anything. At all. A disgruntled expression crossed his face, but he remained silent as they caught up with Jamshid and Zainab at the temple's entrance. Zainab's eyes were shining. An extraordinary place, she enthused. Jamshid has been giving me a wonderful tour. Did you know he was once a novitiate here, Ollie? Ollie nodded. Muntadir told me you had trained for the priesthood. He looked curious. What made you leave it for the guard? Jamshid's face was stony. I wanted to be more proactive in defending my people. Zainab swiftly took her brother's arm. Why don't we go inside? As Jamshid led them into the temple, the healer in Nahri could not help but note that he seemed to be leaning on his cane a bit less. Perhaps the session Muntadir had interrupted had done some good after all. These are our shrines, Jamshid explained, dedicated to our most honored ancestors. He glanced back at Ali. I do believe your people killed a number of them. A favor they returned more than once, as I recall, Ali replied acidly. Maybe we could rehash the war later, Nahri suggested, walking faster. The longer I am away from the infirmary, the higher the chance of an emergency occurring. But at her side, Ollie suddenly went still. She turned to look at him and saw his gaze was locked on the last shrine. It drew the eye, of course. It was the most popular in the temple, garlanded with flowers and offerings. Nahri heard his breath catch. Is that Daevahush's? Kave's voice rang out from behind them, and then the Grand Wazir was striding up, still dressed in his traveling cloak. It is, indeed. He brought his hands up in blessing. Daevahush-i Afshin, the last great defender of the Deva people and guardian to the Nahids. May he rest in the shade of the Creator. Nahri saw Jamshid flinch out of the corner of her eye, but he was quiet, obviously loyal to his tribe first in the face of their visitors. "Grand Wazir," she greeted diplomatically, "may the fires burn brightly for you." "And for you, Banu Nahida," Kaveh replied. "Princess Zainab, peace be upon you. An honor and a surprise to see you here." He turned to Ali, the warmth vanishing from his face. "Prince Alizade," he said flatly, "you returned from Amgazira." Ali didn't seem to notice the rudeness. His gaze hadn't left Dada's shrine, and it looked like he was struggling to keep his composure. His eyes flickered to the bow at the back, and then Nahri saw him stiffen. She couldn't blame him. She'd seen Jamshid react the same way to the replica of the weapon that had nearly taken his life. And then Ali stepped closer, his gaze falling to the base of Dada's statue. Nahri's heart sank. "No, not today." Ali picked up an object from among the pile of tokens. Charred and blackened though it was, its reptilian features were instantly recognizable. Zainab softly gasped, the skeleton perhaps too much even for her. "Is that a crocodile?" she asked, her voice laced with anger. Nahri held her breath. Ali twitched, and she silently cursed whoever had left it. This was it. He was going to explode. He was going to say something so offensive that the priests would want him tossed out, and her plans for the Shah feat were going to be over before she'd even proposed them. "I take it this is meant for me?" Ali asked after a moment of silence. Kaveh spoke first. "I do believe that was the intent." At his side, Jamshid looked ashamed. "Ali," Nahri began, but he was already putting it back. Not on the ground, but at the feet of Dada's stone horse, its hooves stomping the carved sandflies she had no doubt the sharp-eyed prince noticed. He brought his fingers together. "Then to Daevavahush-i Afshin," he said, only the faintest hint of sarcasm in his exaggerated politeness. "The best and most terrifying warrior this crocodile has ever fought." He turned back around, flashing an almost frightening smile at Kaveh. "Come, Grand Wazir," he said, throwing his arm around the other man and pulling him close. "It has been too long since we've shared each other's company, and I know our brilliant Banu Nahida is eager to tell you her plans." Across from her, Kartir was wringing his hands, the elderly priest paler than she'd ever seen. They'd met in a windowless inner chamber with high walls, torches throwing light on the icons of her ancestors that ringed the room. It felt as though even they were staring down disapprovingly at her. Shafit? You intend to work with Shafit? Cartier finally asked, after she finished laying out her plans for the hospital. It sounded as though he were begging her to contradict him. I do, Nahri replied. I have already partnered with one, a physician with far more training and experience than I. She and her husband are incredible practitioners. They are dirt bloods. One of the priestesses all but spat in Daevasti. The unsold spawn of lecherous jinn and humans. Nahri was suddenly grateful. Neither Ali nor Zainab shared their older brother's fluency in the Deva tongue. They are as innocent in their creation as you and I. Heat filled her voice. You forget I was raised in the human world. I will not hear abuse thrown at those who share their blood. Cartier brought his hands together in a gesture of peace, glaring admonishingly at the priestess. Nor shall I. Those sentiments do not have a place in the temple. But Banu Nahida, he added, staring at her beseechingly, please understand that what you suggest is impossible. You cannot use your abilities on a Shafit. It is forbidden. Fear filled his dark eyes. It is said that Nahids lose their abilities upon touching a Shafit. Nahri kept her face composed, but the words hurt. This from the gentle man who'd taught her about their religion, who'd placed a Nahid's original altar in her hands and put her doubts and fears to rest on more than one occasion. Even he harbored the same prejudices as the rest of her people. As Dara had, as her husband did, as nearly everyone who was dear to her did, in fact. An incorrect assumption, she said finally. But I don't intend to heal Shafit myself, she clarified, forcing the despicable words from her tongue. We'd work and study alongside each other. That's all. Another priest spoke up. It is a violation of Suleiman's code to interact with them in any way. Nahri was not unaware of Kaveh looking on, the Grand Wazir's disapproval plain, but unvoiced for now. She suspected he was waiting for the right time to strike. It is not a violation of Suleiman's code, she argued, switching to Jinistani for Ali and Zainab's benefit. It is another interpretation. Another interpretation, Cartier repeated weakly. Yes, she replied, her voice firm. We are in Daevabad, my friends, a protected magical city hidden from humans. What we do here, how we treat those with their blood, it has no bearing on the human world beyond our gates. Treating those already in our world with respect and kindness, does not counteract Suleiman's order that we leave humanity alone."
"Does it not?" Cartier asked. "Would it not be condoning such future interactions?"
"No," Nahri said flatly, continuing in Jinnistani. "Whether or not a jinn obeys the law outside our gates is a separate issue from how we treat those inside them." Her voice rose. "Have any of you been to the Shafit districts? There are children waiting in sewage and mothers dying in childbirth. How can you call yourselves servants of the Creator and think such a thing is permissible?" That seemed to land. Cartier looking slightly chastened. Ali was staring at her with open pride. It didn't go unnoticed, and Kaveh finally spoke. "The prince has put these things in your head," he declared in Daevastana. "My lady, he is a known radical. You mustn't let his fanaticism about the Shafit sway you." "I need no man to put ideas in my head," Nahri retorted. "You speak out of turn, Kaveh-i Pramukh." He tented his hands.
"I meant no disrespect, Banu Nahida."
But there was no apology in his voice. It was the way one would speak to a child, and it grated on her.
"What you're suggesting sounds lovely. It indicates a good heart."
"It indicates a woman who learned her lesson when Ghassan lifted his protection from our tribe after Dara's death," Nahri said in Daevastana. "It is kindness as much as pragmatism that moves me. We will never be safe in Daevabad unless we have peace with the Shafit. You must see this. They are nearly as numerous in the city as we are. Relying on the jinn to keep us from each other's throats is foolish. It leaves us weak and at their mercy."
"It is out of necessity," Kaveh argued. "My lady, respectfully, you are very young. I have seen plenty of overtures of peace to both the jinn and the Shafit in my life. They have never ended well."
"That's my choice to make."
"And yet you're asking our blessing,"
Cartier pointed out gently.
"Are you not?"
Nahri hesitated, her gaze drifting to the icons of her ancestors. The temple whose construction Anahid had overseen, the people she'd knit back together after Suleiman cursed them. "I am not," she said, letting the words fall in Jinnistani as she gazed at the elders around her. "I am informing you as a matter of respect. It is my hospital. They are my abilities, and I do not require your permission. I am the Banu Nahida, and believe it or not, Kaveh," she said, deliberately leaving out his title. "In my few years in Daevabad, I've learned the meaning and the history behind that title. You would not dare question my ancestors." Stunned silence met that. The Grand Vizier stared at her in shock, and a few of the priests drew back.
Yet the Nahids ruled as a council,
Cartier pointed out, undeterred.
Your ancestors discussed things among themselves and with their priests and advisors. They did not rule as kings accountable to no one.
He looked at neither Al-Qatani as he said this, but the implication was there. And they were overthrown, Cartier, she replied, and we have been fighting ever since. It's time to try something new.
I think it is obvious where the Banu Nahida stands.
Kave's voice was curt.
And I.
Jamshid hadn't spoken since they entered the room, but he did now, looking his father in the eye.
She has my support, Baba.
Kaveh glanced at the two of them, his gaze inscrutable.
Then I suppose the matter has been decided. If you don't mind.
He rose to his feet.
I have had quite a long journey.
His words seemed to disband the meeting, and though Nahri was irked he'd been the one to do so, she was also relieved. She'd made her decision clear, and even if the priests didn't like it, they hardly seemed willing to openly defy her. Cartier spoke up one more time.
The procession. If you want our support in this, surely you can grant us your presence in that.
Nahri bit back a groan. She should have known it wouldn't be so easy. Please don't make me do that. Ali frowned.
Do what?
They want to dress me up like a Nahid and put me in some parade for Navasatam. She threw Cartier a desperate look. It's embarrassing.
It is fun,
he clarified with a smile.
The Deva procession is a favorite part of Navasatam, and it's been centuries since we've had a Nahid to join.
You had my mother. He eyed her.
To the stories I've told you of Banu Manaiza, make it seem like she was the type to take part in such a thing.
His face turned beseeching.
Please, do it for your people.
Nahri sighed, guilt nagging at her. Fine. If you will support my hospital, I will dress in a costume and smile like a fool. She feigned a glare. You're slyer than I would have thought. The elderly priest touched his heart.
The sacrifices one makes for their tribe,
he teased. They left the sanctuary after that, making their way out of the temple. Sunspots danced across Nahri's vision as they emerged into the bright afternoon light. Ali paused on the steps.
This place really is lovely,
he said, gazing at the lily-dappled, reflecting pools. A breeze brought the scent of the cedar trees lining the perimeter.
Thank you for allowing us to visit. The circumstances aside, It was an honor. He cleared his throat. And I'm sorry about those circumstances. I'm going to try to be more careful. I promise.
Yes. In turn, thank you for not strangling the Grand Wazir.
But then, remembering the chaos of his apartment, Nahri added, a bit reluctantly,
And thank you for the work you've been doing with the hospital. It hasn't gone unnoticed.
Ali turned to look at her, a surprised grin lighting his face. Was that a compliment?
No,
she said, forcing a grumpiness she didn't feel into her voice.
It's a simple statement of fact.
They began crossing the garden. So, Ali continued, a playful edge in his voice. What is this about dressing up in an Anahid costume? She looked up, eyeing him severely.
Don't start, Al-Qatani. Not when you've been admiring your reflection in every shiny surface we've passed since you got off your horse.
Mortification swept the humor off his face. Was it that obvious? He whispered. Nahri paused, savoring his embarrassment.
Only to anyone who looked your way.
She smiled sweetly.
So, everyone.
Ali cringed, reaching out to touch his turban. I never expected to wear this, he said softly. I couldn't help but wonder how it looked.
Good luck with that excuse when Muntadir learns you stole it.
Admittedly, Ali did cut a striking figure in the turban, the dazzling gold stripes picking up a warmth in his gray eyes. Still, Nahri didn't like it on him.
It doesn't suit you,
she said, as much to herself as to Ali. No, he replied tonelessly. I suppose of the two of us, Muntadir looks more like what people expect of a Qatani prince.
She realized too late the double meaning of her words. Oh no, Ali. That's not what I meant. Not at all. Every time Nahri pinned her chador over her human round ears, she had the same feelings about her appearance not matching expectations, and it made her sick to think she might have implied the same to someone else. It's just I hate that turban. I hate what it represents. The war, Quasi. It seems so rooted in the worst parts of our past.
Ali stopped, turning to face her fully. No, I don't suppose a Banu Nahida who just defied a group of men with a collective millennium on her would think highly of such a tradition. He smiled, shaking his head. Your people are blessed to have you as their leader. I hope you know that. He said the words warmly, with what seemed to be all the friendly sincerity in the world. Nahri's response was immediate. Maybe one day your people will have me as their leader.
She'd meant it as a challenge, and indeed, Ali jerked back, looking slightly startled. But then he broke into a slow grin, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "Well, then I guess I better get back to building your hospital." He touched his heart and brow in the Gaziri salute, clearly biting back a laugh. "Peace be upon you, Banu Nahida." Nahri didn't reply, nor did Ali wait for her to do so. Instead, he turned away, heading towards Zainab, who was already waiting at the gate. Nahri watched him go, suddenly aware of how many other Devas were doing the same, and the quiet scrutiny with which she suspected many had just observed their interaction. She let her expression turn severe, and she stared at the crowd until people began hastily resuming their own activities. Nahri meant what she'd told the priests. She was going to do this her way, and a good Banu Nahida couldn't show weakness. So Nahri would make sure she had none.